Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to episode 93 of Trail Society, produced by Free Trail, brought to you by Rabbit. I'm Corinne Malcolm,
I'm Keely Henninger.
And I'm Hillary Allen.
and it's really cool to say brought to you by Rabbit on Happy National Girls and Women in Sport Day. We're recording this on February 5th, um, ahead of some travel for me getting to join Hillary pretty soon. But we're getting deeper into Q1 of 2025. The dust is settling on a lot of contract talk. We're probably all sick of it, but we're actually finally at a point where I think we as a group can talk about it a little bit. We can talk about where we've landed, what's going on, just like pull back the curtains a little bit on that side of our lives as professional athletes and humans. And so I figured to like kind of close the chapter of sponsorship talk, we can talk about what's going on with us. I know Keely, we've mentioned it a little bit, but you're all in on medical school right now. You've opted to forego a formal sponsorship, which is like pretty, I would say, unusual in the sport of trail and ultra running, where everyone is like hungry to sign that contract. So can you just catch us up a little bit on that and like again, just like maybe reiterating or re-hitting on like why that decision? That I think that's very uncommon.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I have nothing bad to say about my previous sponsors. Like they treated me so well. But yeah, it just felt like I didn't need the extra pressure. I know myself well enough that trying to balance running and life and med school is already gonna be hard enough so that if I had the external pressure of needing to race X amount of races or do certain races, would just not jive super well with my already rather type 1 personality. And I also just kind of wanted the freedom to race what I want, when I want, wear what I want, just like go back to the basics and do running because I really love it and not feel like this pressure to, do photo shoots and post to social media all the time and wear the things that I'm supposed to wear and race the races I'm supposed to races. And I know it sounds kind of silly, and I know that's part of the fun of being with a brand, but I feel like I'm barely scraping by time-wise and mental capacity-wise with the things I choose to do, and it just felt like a really unnecessary stress for me. And yeah, I'm really excited to not be kind of like having those responsibilities this year, and I can use some of that energy and time to do other things. And knowing myself, I don't think it's going to really impact my racing at all. So yeah, it's an interesting choice, but it feels really good. And like I felt so much stress go away once I decided, because I guess the last thing I'll say on that is one of the other reasons I decided was like I feel a lot of stress around having sponsors and having to post. And if I feel like I'm not posting like the best that I can or giving them the content they need to the best of my ability, I feel a lot of guilt about that. And so knowing that I'm not going to be able to put my best foot forward in terms of like delivering that kind of content too also kind of weighed into that decision because I want to put out good content, but I don't have the mental capacity to do any of that right now and I don't want to. So those are kind of all of the reasons.
I think that's cool. I think it's really, I mean, I don't want to say it's brave because I don't feel like you did this like crazy brave thing, but I do think it's different. It's different than what a lot of folks are doing. It's different than, we hear people losing contracts, getting drops, contracts ending. It's cool that it was your choice and it's not a permanent choice. It's just like a what you need right now. And I think that's really, yeah, just like powerful that you listened to what you actually wanted and aren't afraid to pursue that. Maybe you are afraid. I'm just like putting that on you now, but I
No,
think that it's really
I don't
cool.
feel afraid. I will say I didn't drop every single sponsor. I still held on to Goo because I love Goo and they have some cool research coming up that we're kind of like we've always been collaborating on stuff and shooting the shit and I love fueling with that. So for me that was like a no-brainer, but yeah, it's very low stakes and they've just supported me from day one and so I couldn't bring myself to end that one.
Perfect. Perfect. But you don't have a big shoe sponsor right now, and that
Mm-mm.
is um the other kind of piece of that puzzle. I guess switching things over to Hillary, we've got three very different scenarios here, which I think is really interesting. So Hillary, you stayed with your most recent sponsor, Brooks. I know that you had to renegotiate. That is super stressful. It is a horrible time of year. We alluded to that, I think back in like November or December about like how hard that is for athletes to
Mm-hmm.
the uncertainty, the not knowing, the I don't know, it feels very personal, but at the same time, it's business. So tell us a little bit about re-signing with Brooks and, anything you can, I guess, about how that renegotiation process went. I know that you worked really hard to build your own brand, to be doing stuff outside of your running and separating some of those pieces of the puzzle, I think are super interesting. So tell us a little bit about what that looks like.
Yeah, so obviously it's like as much as you can talk openly about this stuff. I mean, obviously it's very stressful. I don't love it. I think what's hard is because I think all of us run just because we love it first and foremost. But then there's the job aspect of it and there's the performative nature of it. And then, it boils down to dollar amounts and, sponsorship, which can kind of take that out, like take that away from it or kind of quantify it in a way that I think can feel icky, into like, assigning your worth, so to speak. Um, so that can be really difficult for the contract negotiation stuff. But ultimately, I think I've always done well when I mean, I've been lucky enough to work with brands and sponsors that to a certain extent can allow me the freedom to kind of do the races that I really want. And I think that's really important because if not, then if I'm not motivated to do it, then can we actually do our best? So still continuing down that track, like I really believe in, Brooks and what they're doing, and their shoes are wonderful first and foremost. So that's like was a really important piece of the puzzle for me. Um, but like I said, I have always done really well if I have a balance, like doing, well, balance, I'm using air quotes because I don't really truly believe in the term, but having something that defines me outside of just running. And so, yeah, I've tried to delineate that a little bit more of like working on certain things that are separate from running, like in any capacity, and growing those other parts of like my coaching business and things like this. And then, yeah, then kind of doing some things that are still in the same bin as running, but more community oriented. And, yeah, so it's like it's been took a little bit of work to kind of figure it out, but I think landed at a good spot. Still very excited. And this year, yeah, so kind of going along that way of like, okay, listening to myself of like, well, maybe certain brands want me to go to certain races, but then working with, I had some new partners this year, which are really excited to support me no matter if I want to compete locally or like a big international stage. So that was really important to me, so that I can continue to just enjoy the sport and, do hard things because you can't run 100 miles or far distances you're not if you don't want to. So like yeah, so that's kind of where I've landed. And yeah, just excited to like I mean, every race is just an opportunity to learn. And I think if other brands have that perspective as well of like opportunities for growth and like partnership together, like that's the best scenario that I could ask for.
That's huge. Yeah, it's like you gotta be in a good headspace to go to the well in a big way. I guess I can share my news. It's
Yeah, sure.
official.
Corinne, tell us about your big change. Like this is huge. Like we've heard the inside scoop of it, but like it's really cool to I don't know, just yeah, tell us what's up because I think like this is like a perfect space for you and I'm really excited to see what comes of it.
Yeah, I'm really excited. So the news broke today on the 5th. Hoka helped us put together the like world's cutest team announcement. I don't know if you guys saw it. It's really, really sweet. It's basically a FaceTime call between myself and the other new women runners that are joining the Hoka team. So I'll be running for Hoka this year, which feels like a big change. But it's really cool. It's myself, Katie Asmuth, Lottie Brinks, Allison Baca, and Jess Brezzo all on this like little kind of intro together of us calling each other to be like, no way, like we're so stoked. We had to like awkwardly film it by ourselves, and then they like meshed it into this like beautiful little phone call, which is really cute. Um, I don't know. I was like, oh, do I not like the term cute with like our announcement? But it really fits. Like it's a really sweet little promo of the team. But actually the bigger news there is that the athlete contract is very much secondary and is really not why I moved to Hoka. I actually got a job. You guys, I have like a job at Hoka. I'm not an employee. I'm a contractor. Um, but I am essentially contracted for a part-time position for the year, working on the sports marketing team, but kind of cross-functional with the events team as well. And I'm specifically working on women in trail running, which is really exciting because
Mhm.
I've been doing this like this work, this heart work, pouring my soul into it and not always getting compensated for how I can fit another 10 hours into every day. And so it was cool to find a partner where they effectively created an opportunity for me to come into the team. I'm like learning a new language because I have no hard skills. I'm not a marketing person. I'm an athlete, I'm a coach. I've done a lot of science, done a lot of writing and editing, but I have not really dabbled in like the insides of the marketing world. I've pitched for like, projects and like athlete stuff, but I've never been on the other side of things. So I'm literally learning so much every single day. I'm in meetings and like my colleagues who have knew me before I got this role are like texting me so that like they'll be like, "Oh, like that means," they're decoding the mess like the words for me in the middle of the meeting. It's really cute. Um but effectively I'll be working to try to grow the women's side of the sport from the grassroots level, working obviously alongside Hoka affiliated events, things like Javelina, Black Canyon, the UTMB World Series, Western States. So I'm doing the work from the inside still effectively, and I'm really excited to try to push a lot of these things forward and try to make a tangible difference because we talk a lot about getting more women into the sport. But how can we do that? How can we create mentorship and build community and also allow athletes and women the opportunity from all walks of life to make it to these start lines? So yeah, I've got a big task. But yeah, so that came along with a athlete contract effectively. And I'm excited that I get to kind of do that all under one umbrella. My media stuff is largely Hoka as well, so it kind of all falls into one bucket now, and that feels way less complicated than like me taping over logos on clothing for like the last year when I'm on air in the wrong places. So that was really cool. I was very excited about it.
Nice. I think
Yeah.
like I said, I think it's super cool. And yeah, I'm so glad all the things are aligned because that's really, I mean, we know, like I think everyone also, like I say, us three on this, podcast, but like collective we, the ultra running community has known how much work you've been doing and trying to, and specifically in the realm of women's sports. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Hoka should be really psyched to have you.
Yeah. Well, while we continue to pat ourselves on the back for doing good jobs and being where we need to be right now, we've talked a lot about how partnerships are really important, and we actually got really great feedback from you guys too. We are all really excited about our partnership with Rabbit. Again, a women founded, women owned company. They make clothing for everyone, but they're really excited to do more and more for trail. I picked up a pair of the Easy Tights like a year or two ago, and I live in them. Like they are soft, like buttery smooth, and I do believe they make a jogger style pants in them, and I'm worried when I get those pants because we are going to be decked out in rabbit gear. When we get those pants, I'm a little bit worried that I'm never going to take them off. So I apologize in advance if that is my new uniform coming in 2025. But yeah, just a big shout out. We're really excited to work together on numerous projects. And again, we will tell you more as we get into 2025. So we're going to skip right along, I think, to some results, but mostly some news. It's obviously we're recording this ahead of Black Canyon, ahead of Tarawera. There are races coming down the pipeline fast, hot and fast and deep, and the fields are wild. I'm getting prepped to do the media work for Black Canyon, and like you just have to keep scrolling on the women's race because it is seriously that good. Right after that, Tarawera, where Haley will be racing the 100 miler. Going to be really cool to be on the ground there. Way Too Cool's around the corner. Chuckanut's around the corner. Chianti by UTMB's around the corner. Big Alta and Marin Gorge Waterfalls weekend in Portland. Lake Sonoma 50, Desert Rats. It's on. Like race season is here. I'm sorry the off season was not long enough for anyone. It's go time. I'm
Yeah,
excited. Hopefully,
where did it
hopefully it's
happen?
mostly excitement.
No, I think so. I mean, it's like it's crazy to see. And again, wait, Corinne, remind me, which races are actually like are offering like is it Black Canyons that's offering 3 golden tickets?
Black
Uh,
Canyon is doing 3,
And
Chianti's
canyons.
doing Terraware is 2,
mhm.
Chianti's 2, Canyons Endurance Runs in April is 3. So bing bang boom. It's a lot of golden tickets on the line in the next like 8 weeks, 10 weeks.
Yeah.
We're gonna
Yeah.
be there. I'm gonna be there for a lot of it. I'm really excited. It's okay. I'm just gonna like bop around the world and collect stones and like maybe race a little bit. But everyone else is going for gold, going for golden tickets, going for entries into UTMB for this year and next year. It's gonna be wild. And I'm really excited to be both at like the grassroots races here at home, but also all over the place. I wanted to like close the loop on some sponsorship news, and there are more athletes yet to announce. And I think we'll know more in the next 2 weeks. Like by the time this comes out, this will be like dated information. But wanted to give shout outs. Brooks finally announced that Chris Myers, Anthony Felber, Christina Randrup, and Barrett Gray are joining the Brooks team. I'm really excited for Christina and Barrett to get that opportunity. They're both local Seattle Rippers, and they're young, they're hungry, they're really talented. So to get an opportunity to have a little bit more support is a big deal. I mentioned that Hoka picked up a number of women alongside me. Ultra picked up Hans Troyer and Lindsay Allison. I think Kraft's big notable pickups were Mary Denholm and David Sinclair that we kind of knew about, and then Tom Evans going to ASICS, which actually makes a lot of sense because I believe his wife is an ASICS triathlon athlete. So this kind of like the whole family's an ASICS now. The baby is going to be an ASICS pretty soon. So excited to see that. Are there any other bits and bops of sponsorship news that you guys have heard or been privy to?
No.
Mm-mm.
No.
No, I feel
Mum's the
so out of
word.
the loop, so I feel like you guys are keeping me up to date on stuff.
Keely's like, you just tell me every other week what's happening in the world, and I will agree with you. I guess the last thing is that we don't know this officially yet. It should be announced by the time this podcast comes out, but we do believe that the rumors are true that Joylene, who won Sears and all this year, the amazing Kenyan athlete who like quit running after high school, had a couple of kids, then has lost like 30 kilos and then won Sears and all. Like very cool story. She's been running in Solomon recently, so wondering if that's a Solomon pickup. And then Joyce Najiru, the one of the other like super talented trail athletes out of Kenya, we do believe is going to Normal, which would be a big pickup for Normal. They need women on that team. And having one of the best on the Golden Trail series on the women's side in their kit and their shoes would be a big deal. So keep your eyes peeled. I'm just spreading rumors now though, which is really fun. Okay. I got a little news happy. I don't know if you guys saw the outline, but I was like, yes, yes, more, more, more. So, we don't need to cover all of this. Maybe I'll just cover the first couple. And maybe like Hilly, I don't know if you've seen any of this or had any insight, but um the two ones that I really wanted to highlight was that they're working towards parity in gravel cycling. And Unbound announced that they were opening up 75 additional spots in the 100 mile and the premier 200-mile distance of their races. It's basically the unofficial championships of gravel cycling.
Mhm.
And this is a step to kind of work towards parity in those start fields at gravel's biggest event. I think it's cool. I don't know a ton about any additional kind of behind the scenes information. Like, is this happening at more races within the Lifetime Grand Prix, for example? But I saw this from Heather Jackson and it made me really excited.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I basically did, well, I was at the race before they did like just elite only women start. And it was just like part of the mass start at the front of the field. And it's pretty hectic and like, it interferes with like kind of like the female race. And so I was fortunate enough to be part of the first women's only like elite start
This
at
past year.
it was actually a few years ago.
Okay.
Um, I believe in 2000, oh gosh, 21 or 22 but and 2023 I did it as well and so I think as far as I think Unbound sets the precedent for a lot of these other races in the Grand Prix because a lot of other races have followed suit to have a women's only start, but it was really cool especially last year just to see that it was like yeah like a women's only elite start because they could actually just race each other. And then we had like the incredible finish in the last where five women came at the end at the finish line and then they had to outsprint each other to take the win at Unbound. So I think they've wanted to have more spots because typically the elite male field has a lot more cyclists than women. I think there was only maybe 40 or 50 on the in the elite only for women's corral. So opening up that slot, there's qualification processes obviously that you have to submit an application to see if you qualify. So again, I think it's really cool. And I think they're kind of setting the precedent for that for other races within the Grand Prix and hopefully some other races too, like maybe even in the running world. So
Yeah, I think that like it's a good reminder that races like Western States and UTMB and the Golden Trail World Series can set the precedent for other races. And so encouraging that is a really good thing. The other big bit of cycling news that I thought was interesting that has some crossover is Demi Vollering, and the Demi Vollering effect. She's obviously one of the best female road cyclists of her generation, of this current generation, one of the biggest names in cycling. She signed a personal deal with Nike in 2024 ahead of the Paris Olympics, which was massive, massive news. But even more so recently, she moved teams this year. Um, and what happened as she moved teams was that all of a sudden brands came with her. So Specialized came with her and is like now kitting out her new team, FDJ Swiss. So so again, Specialized came with her, and then all of a sudden Nike now came with her. So Nike is not just doing like her leisure wear, but they are sponsoring the entire team, which is just a great reflection of like how a marquee athlete can have a huge influence in the sport. This collaboration between the women's pro team and Nike is the first time Nike is doing this kind of super brand deal supporting a full pro cycling team. So that is just like big news. And for it to be happening in women's cycling in particular is really, really exciting. And then
Yeah.
real fast. And then I swear we'll move on to the meaty stuff today. But investor news. I just think it's really cool to highlight that investors are really continuing to notice women's sports. Ariel Investments, which is basically like a venture firm, is entering the women's sports sector with what they're calling Project Level. And it's a fund targeting investments from ultra high net worth families. The fund will be led by Jason Wright as the managing partner and the head of investments with the advisory board, including F1 driver Lewis Hamilton, Queen Latifah, the fashion designer Stella McCartney, sorry. The fund has already made its first investment as the leading investor in the NWSL's Denver expansion team. And again, that expansion team for the soccer league has the biggest expansion fee of all time, doubling previous expansion fees at $110 million. So cool to have this firm come in and be one of those major kind of contributors and also just like be like, yeah, part of what you can invest in with our company is specifically women's athletics. So really cool to see that. And I just like that women's sports seem to be taking over and moving more and more mainstream. And it's a big deal. And we'll see that trickle into other more niche sports as well. Okay. Are you ready for a little bit of a deep dive?
Oh yeah.
Meat and potatoes, tofu and beans, rice and beans, tofu and curry, naan and something. We're here for it. Paneer, we're having paneer for dinner. Okay. So we've gotten a lot of supplement questions, I would say, specifically related to iron and specifically related to creatine. And I would like to do a larger iron deep dive and then maybe like a little creatine kind of snack before we close things up. So I guess to start, and Keely, I know that you're a nerd and that you actually recently got to shadow. Did you shadow a hematologist or are you just hanging out with the hematologist?
I went to a
Were you going?
hematologist.
You went to a hematologist. We love this. Yes, everyone go to a hematologist. I was like, maybe she was like
But he
working
was
with
so
them for the day.
cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
So can we start, I guess, with and you can set this up for us maybe, about why is iron important? Like, why should athletes take iron? Why do we need it? Just like really just kind of like a basic look at like what it is and why it's important.
Well, unlike other minerals in your body, we can't produce our own iron, so we have to ingest it from food or from supplements. And so for some people, like if you're not eating enough iron in your food, you might become iron deficient. And then for some athletes, because of all of the other things we're doing to our body, which could be like red blood cell hemolysis, among other things, you could also start getting less iron. And so you would need to supplement. And why that's important is because it's one of the key components of hemoglobin, which is a protein in the red blood cells that's really important for like transporting oxygen throughout the body. And without it, the hemoglobin is not going to be able to bind oxygen quite as well. And thus your organs and tissues won't get as much oxygen, which if you can think about, when you're running or exercising, the thing that's keeping your muscles going is oxygen. And if you don't have oxygen, like say you're a sprinter and you're using your anaerobic muscles, so muscles that don't use oxygen, they will fatigue really, really, really fast, right? Because they're not getting oxygen. And so we don't want that as endurance athletes. We want to be able to use our slower twitch muscles, the muscles that require oxygen. And so sometimes if you have a deficiency in iron, this can lead to iron deficiency anemia, which a lot of those symptoms around that are things you would expect, right? Like if you don't have enough oxygen going to your muscles, you'll probably be a little more tired. You might be more irritable. You might have weaker muscles, feel like you're getting fatigued quicker in workouts. You might have a big propensity to feel worse at altitude because altitude is a little more demanding. Um, and then one other part of iron and iron deficiency for women, especially, or those who menstruate, is that because we do menstruate and lose blood every single month, women are notoriously more at risk for iron deficiency anemia because we are losing a lot of that every single month. And so if you have especially heavy periods or something like that, you could be at even higher risk. A little peep into my world is like I've always battled anemia. The first time was because I was vegan for probably the wrong reasons at the time, but while I was vegan, I was running a ton and I wasn't eating any meat and I wasn't supplementing any iron. And so I became really iron deficient. Um, since then, I've been eating meat and supplementing, but my most recent visit with the hematologist was just to like dive into my anemia a little more because I can never quite get my ferritin to go above what's considered low. And he was talking about the blood loss during menstruation. So he had me count my tampons that I use during a whole cycle.
You're like,
So I know
whoa,
it
that's so
sounds
much
a little
information.
icky, but it's like it's really cool to do it, right? And then you might think you bleed a lot or you might think you bleed a little, but then you give the data to someone who knows what it should be or what the average is, and they can tell you like, oh, you actually are on the higher end of that curve or the lower end of the curve, or you're right in the middle, right? And so in my case, I use more than normal, so that means my menstrual cycles are heavier. And then he doesn't do any genetic testing for this, but his current hypothesis and some of the thoughts in the field of hematology are that red blood cell hemolysis, so basically what that means is when you're running, you impact the ground, that can lead to some red blood cell damage, which is why runners might become iron deficient. Some people are more predisposed to having more of that than others. And so you could be like on that bell curve as well. And all of those things combined on top of your nutritional status and iron supplementation can lead to different levels of iron in your body or iron deficiency anemia. And so very long-winded way to tell people what iron was, but
No,
very
totally. It's
interesting.
great.
Good, we know all the terminology. But my question there with like the hemolysis of like the breaking apart of the red blood cells, is that due to the actual impact or is that like the
Yeah, foot
or
strike
I'm
The
thinking
hemolysis.
actual, yeah, it's the actual impact.
right, but is there also a factor? My question is there also a factor of like there's a lot of like muscle tearing, right? That
Yep.
happens too.
So muscle contractions are another way that we lose it. You
Yeah.
lose it in your sweat. You can get like really, really low grade GI bleeding that you wouldn't necessarily know about,
Mm.
right? Because it's
Mhm.
like really, really benign. If you ever race a really hot race and you just like destroy your GI tract, that's a good way to have some GI bleeding. We
Black
see it.
face.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you just like you
Yeah.
see it in like like male endurance athletes who all of a sudden have anemia. It's like, ooh, and they're not vegans, for example. It's oftentimes like a GI bleed that's like on like that's like subclinical. It's like
Yeah.
it's not a big deal, but it's enough that they're losing blood. I have also struggled with anemia for a long time. It came on when I was super, super mega overtrained and unhealthy, doing biathlon. And it was basically like I think I had a big inflammatory response, like an autoimmune response to like my body being so messed up. And inflammation is a big like inhibitor of iron absorption.
I was just gonna say.
Um,
Yep.
and so that's like ever since then, essentially, like I work with the hematologist and I have to get iron infusions, and we'll talk more about iron infusions maybe at the end of this. But yeah, as a professional athlete, there's a wrinkle and a complication because
Mhm.
a TUE is probably necessary, but yeah, it's a big deal. And kind of like, I guess, reflecting back a little bit, I wrote an article about iron deficiency forever ago, and I like reread part of it earlier today. It was actually I wrote it for CTS when I was coaching with them, and I was like, I wrote this. This is so good. And so what I wrote was iron deficiency directly causes a reduction in aerobic power. The greater the deficiency, the greater the reduction. Any stage of iron deficiency inhibits oxygen transport to some degree. However, the reduction in hemoglobin seen in stage 3 of iron deficiency, I like to think of it as like iron deficiency, um, iron deficiency non-anemia, and then iron deficient anemia. It's kind of like the three levels. When you see that reduction of hemoglobin finally, and like the final stage of iron deficient anemia, um, that has like the most profound consequence on how oxygen is transported to muscle tissue during exercise. And I wrote, as a result, the cost of exercise is higher in an iron deficient state. This makes you less efficient, i.e., altering lactate threshold and depleting muscle glycogen rapidly at any given intensity. Being iron deficient also negatively impacts your body's ability to adapt to new stimuli. These impacts hinder recovery from general training stimuli and impair adaptation to stimuli like altitude exposure. Has anyone ever been running up a hill and you're not like out of shape, and all of a sudden you're like, why is running up a hill so much harder than normal? I'm always like, red flag, I am probably anemic.
Oh yeah.
And like 9 times out of 10, I'm anemic, and 1 time out of 10, I'm just really tired. But it does, effectively, I think of it as if my lactate threshold has been lowered. So I am hitting that tipping point, that efficiency kind of tip over from aerobic to anaerobic way sooner than I normally would. And you can like sense that in your body. I think that athletes are really, really attuned to this. And that's why most people don't get caught, like most the normal population, right, which is like 5% of or so the normal population is iron deficient, or ends up with anemia, like up to 50% of athletes or something like that. I think a lot of athletes come in clinically with iron deficient non-anemia, i.e. drops in ferritin but no drop in hemoglobin yet, and doctors don't know what to do with you because it's like, well, your hemoglobin's normal, so you're fine. And you're like, I'm not fine. I can't go uphill. And they're like, maybe you should run less. I think a lot of athletes end up in that window, and we're here to tell you that that's not a fun window to be in, and that we would like to help you fix it. We're not doctors. That's really important. We're not hematologists. You should always see a doctor, and you should always fight to see a doctor that agrees with your biases. And then you should fight to see a good hematologist. But backing up a little bit, I think it's really important to also reflect on iron metrics. And I call them metrics because it's what we measure when you go to the doctor. You get a blood draw, things like hemoglobin, hematocrit, ferritin, serum iron, transferrin saturation, because TS percent sounds like a crazy number, and then total iron binding capacity, or TIBC, are common things you see when you get your blood drawn. And I wrote definitions for these, and I have no medical experience, so I'm wondering how Keely feels about some of these. But I'll start with hemoglobin. It's hemoglobin is one of those values that you see on your blood test. It is something that you're going to look for when that drop off below out of the normal range is like generally like you have anemia, but it's a protein actually found in your red blood cells, and that is what bonds oxygen and transports it. Ferritin's important because it helps to make hemoglobin, which helps to make all these things happen. Hematocrit, which people get all hung up on because it sounds like a big fancy number, is really just like the percent of red blood cells in your blood, and you divide it by blood volume. And so people get really bent out of shape with hematocrit, but it can be like influenced greatly by hydration status and genetics. And so I don't really worry. Yeah, I don't worry about hematocrit personally. I don't know how you feel about that, Keely, but like when I get a blood draw, like I want to know my hemoglobin, my ferritin, and then oftentimes like if my ferritin's low in particular, I want to know like the serum iron and transferrin information. Like, how do you feel about that as opposed to like hematocrit? To me is kind of a throwout number.
Yeah, no, I think it's not throwout, but I think it's the one that you really have to look at trends. And if you're always well below the reference range, then I think that could be an issue. But I think, yeah, on any given blood draw, because it is so easily variable based off of hydration status and other variables like pregnancy and altitude, then yeah, I think you can disregard it and have like maybe just ask yourself, like, was I super hydrated or and again, if it's trending to always be like significantly lower than the range, then I think it is something to potentially bring up with your doctor. But if it's like a one-off, don't worry about it.
Yeah. And then ferritin's the one that I get really hung up on, that I like cling to, like it's a life raft. And if I fall off of it, I'm gonna die like the people in the Titanic. But ferritin, again, it's a protein found in the body, and it stores iron. And it plays a crucial role in maintaining iron levels and ensuring that the body has enough iron for essential functions, such as red blood cell production. It
Yeah,
is
and
also, I was gonna say, it's also like it can be artificially high if you get a blood draw and you have a ton of inflammation, like you're sick or something. it can come back artificially high. So
Mhm.
that is important when you go to get a blood draw that you're not like, you don't have like DOMs from running downhill super hard the day before.
Yes, totally. And I think just one thing there, because we talked about this and you just defined hemoglobin. So now hopefully our audience at least kind of knows what that is. The reason why you can have low ferritin before you have low hemoglobin is because ferritin is like representing the body's stored iron reserve, whereas that's going to be depleted first, right? Like you're going to get rid of those stores first before actually taking away hemoglobin from your red blood cells. And so the circulating hemoglobin levels might still be normal, but if you see that ferritin continue to drop, eventually that will start impacting hemoglobin as well once those iron stores get depleted, and then you're gonna have to start. And then when you're losing those red blood cells, you're not gonna be able to replenish that iron or the hemoglobin.
Yeah, mine will be like my ferritin will go once my ferritin hits 20, then my hemoglobin starts to drop. So as my ferritin goes below 20, then my hemoglobin will go with it. But it's like it's right around that, which is like generally like well, like 20 is like within the range, and it's just like I feel horrible. Like no one feels great. So, yeah,
Yeah, and
that's a
what
big
is
deal.
the range, Corinne?
Oh, it's I think technically like 11 or 12 is considered like 12 is considered the bottom of the range for women. I think it's higher for men. And then I want to say it goes to like 170 for women, but it goes over 200 for men, I believe. Is that right? Am I crazy? I'm just
That
pulling
is
numbers out of my head.
those are the medical like threshold for anemia versus not. However, most doctors and lab results now will cut off women below 35
That's
for
great.
ferritin.
That's
And
great.
because that's what they've found in the literature is where people start to feel the effects of anemia. And
Hmm.
so honestly, even for people who want to get IV iron or something like that, if you have consistent ferritin below 35 for some doctors and below 30 for others, again, check with your provider that now can qualify for like insurance approved IV iron due to anemia because they know that the effects are felt by most.
Yeah, and we've known that like non quote unquote non-adapters to altitude were likely people who had ferritin below 35 because we know that you really can't make hematological changes or adaptations. Yeah, when your iron, when your ferritin specifically is below 35. So one of the thresholds that my new hematologist here in Seattle and I use is 35. Which is what actually my gynecologist referred me to him, which is amazing. And he's like, what's your number? Like, what's what are we trying to like circumvent here? Like, what's the issue? And like, he predominantly like she refers to him because it's like people who have heavy menses. He's like, oh yeah, he's like my hair transplant people when their ferritin's below 60, we infuse them. And I was like, that's so interesting. I know nothing about hair transplants. Anyway, I digress. Um, one other things that will oftentimes show up on tests are serum iron, which is generally it's the amount of iron circulating in your bloodstream. Um, and that can be like I guess like the reason why you wouldn't want that super high is because iron is not water soluble and can deposit in your organs and in your tissues. And so serum iron, like you can have a high serum iron, but if it's not being stored, there's probably an absorption issue. And so like continuing to supplement on top of that can actually be bad because it's not going to make it where it needs to go and it can be deposited in tissue in your body.
Mhm.
Is that the appropriate amount of fear mongering, Keely?
Yeah, and I think that just comes into account of like just because you're a female athlete and you think you might need to take iron does not mean you need to take iron. So before starting any supplement, I would get a blood draw and work with your doctor to see what your levels are because you don't want to start an iron supplement if you do have really high serum iron. You also don't want to start one if your ferritin and everything is fine and your iron is high. So like, work with your doctor. Don't just blindly start one. Make sure you get that baseline first so you don't get into that toxicity range for circulating iron.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's again not water soluble, meaning you don't pee out the excess,
Mhm.
which becomes a safety concern with supplementation. The other two that are very common on tests that I find are transferrin saturation. Often it's TS percent. And it's the percentage of iron bound to the protein transferrin in the blood. It's transferrin again is responsible for transporting iron throughout the body. Low TS percent, generally below 20%, would like suggest iron deficiency. High TS percent, above 50% or so, would suggest iron overload, i.e., it's not being stored well, it's not being absorbed in the body. And the last one that comes up a lot, again, is TIBC or total iron binding capacity. And that is the amount of room there is for extra iron. And you'll see that that's oftentimes high in iron deficiency anemia, right? Because you have a lot of extra room for iron that's not being utilized. So those are kind of the big ones that come up on blood tests and why they're important. And people are like, I didn't know I was coming to a science lecture today, but it's important for athletes. So,
Yeah, and I kind of love the transferrin metrics because I think they're at first were really confusing for me to understand. But like if you think of it as like, I'm gonna do a really silly analogy, but we talked about this in class. Basically, if you think about like the transferrin molecule being like a school bus, it's like
mhm.
picking up kids and the kids are the iron, right? And so like if the transferrin is low, that means the bus is taking less iron places. So like that's not going to be very helpful. And then when you look at like total iron binding capacity, it's basically like the total number of school buses that can actually carry the iron. And so like if the number is high, it means there's a ton of these like empty buses, but like with low transferrin, there's not many people on the buses. And so it's just like that balance is not very great for getting iron to tissues. You got a lot of buses that are kind of empty with not many kids on them. That's not a very happy school.
I that's actually a great analogy. Like I can physically picture it. I can mentally picture it. Physically, I can't picture it. Mentally, I can picture that. And I like that because you're right. It is really confusing where you're like, why is this high and this low? Like, how am I out of reference ranges all over the place? So that can be important. But again, working with a good hematologist and a good doc is always the way to go. We kind of defined these things earlier, but again, just defining kind of those stages of iron deficient anemia and kind of what those thresholds are. So iron deficiency, just straight up iron deficiency, you're not yet anemic, hemoglobin's normal, etc. Again, that's when your serum ferritin goes below 35, which is now a lot of labs are using that as the cutoff for women in particular. Men's thresholds are generally a little bit higher. And then hemoglobin's going to remain in that normal range. Kind of another step down the road from that would be iron deficient non-anemia. Again, I think a lot of athletes find themselves in this position because they didn't catch the iron deficiency. Their hemoglobin's normal. There are no red flags. Maybe they've never even gotten a ferritin, right? They've only ever gotten hemoglobin done with like a CBC, like a normal standard blood test as opposed to an iron panel. A lot of athletes, I think, fall into this iron deficient non-anemia. Again, continued drop in serum ferritin below 20 now. You're also going to have a drop in serum iron oftentimes, decreased transferrin saturation, increased total iron binding capacity. Those things we just talked about. The school buses are empty. You got school buses and they're empty. You don't want to be here. But again, hemoglobin is often normal. So kind of in that like you're in a ghost town and you shouldn't be there. So again, supplementation, talking to a doc, consulting a hematologist about the efficacy for you to get an iron infusion could bypass this because some issues for people is like absorbing iron is really really hard, and as athletes we've got a lot of inflammation and other things that are probably limiting that. So talking to your medical team really important there. And then iron deficient anemia is kind of the final stop for those buses, and it's hemoglobin is now also dropping. You don't have iron, you can't make red blood cells. Hemoglobin is also dropping. You can't produce hemoglobin. Oxygen is not being bound to anything. You feel awful. You're at the end of the line there, and that's just it's a bummer. But again, you can feel those effects of not having enough iron all the way back at just iron deficiency. Again, ferritin below 35 and hemoglobin being normal. You can feel those effects that I talked about where you just feel underpowered in a big way. I think the last maybe really important piece before we just talk a little bit about supplementation is hepcidin and the hepcidin response. I did not know this, guys, until today, that hepcidin wasn't discovered until the early 2000s,
Mm.
Hmm. I
right?
know.
I thought people knew about this for forever.
I love hearing about this because I feel like I learn everything in school like it's been known forever, but I don't actually know when it was identified. It's like they teach it like, oh, we've always known this. It's like maybe not.
Maybe only for like 25 years. Yeah. Your hepcidin can like vote, but like only by a couple of years maybe. But yeah, hepcidin response wasn't well known until the early 2000s, but essentially it's a hormone. It's designed to protect you. Your body is really freaking smart, actually. It's really cool. So it is like the regulator um, for iron homeostasis, iron metabolism. And it basically says like, hey, we don't like hepcidin goes up. It's like no more iron. We can't have any more iron. Please don't give us any more iron. You will die. So hepcidin is supposed to be protective for you. from absorbing too much iron. It's also linked, we believe, to some inflammatory cytokines in the body, and those get upregulated with exercise. And so we've got this exercise released hepcidin response that's very like it's unique to the athletic population. So it's not just the body being smart to not absorb iron. We also kind of naturally F ourselves up in this regard. And it sounds like Keely has a great analogy maybe about playground equipment when it comes to hepcidin.
Oh, I guess I do. I'm going with the school theory here. I was just saying, like, this makes iron supplementation and increasing your iron levels and eventually ferritin and hemoglobin really difficult because you're always kind of seesawing with hepcidin. Basically, with low iron, it will go down, it's going down, trying to get your body to be able to absorb more iron. But then you're supplementing with iron. If you supplement too often with too high a dose of iron, your hepcidin will go back up and say, like, don't absorb any more of this iron, and then you throw exercise into the mix, and it just, the seesaw analogy really just to emphasize that increasing ferritin and hemoglobin through iron supplementation is not super straightforward, especially for athletes where we have all these conflicting things in the body going on.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. And then timing is an issue, right? And we'll talk more about timing, but like things inhibit iron absorption. So many things. It's like we're not designed to absorb heavy metals, it turns out. But essentially, like when do you supplement iron can be really important. And the hepcidin response peaks, I think, 3 to 6 hours post exercise. So it's like, do you take iron immediately after exercise? Do you wait and take iron really far away from exercise, like before you go to bed? Because coffee, which we all love
Yep.
here, which we are mildly addicted to, no wonder, also inhibits iron absorption. So it's
In
like,
theory.
in theory, but then hepcidin like decreases again
Yeah.
overnight. And so it's like, when do you put the iron in the body to try to like circumvent all of these things that are apparently an issue? One of the studies I pulled for this just talks about kind of it's a meta-analysis. It's actually a really long title. It's Effects of Oral Iron Supplementation on Blood Iron Status in Athletes, a systematic review, meta-analysis, and meta-regression of randomized controlled trials. Basically, they looked at a lot of studies to kind of try to summarize how effective oral iron supplementation is. And what they found is kind of what we know, where it takes a lot of time, like 6 to 8 weeks, kind of minimum, to see a response in ferritin for the most part. And again, it's confounded by all these kind of other variables when it comes to actually being absorbed. They found that people that have a ferritin below 12 have the greatest response to supplementing iron, which makes a lot of sense. Like iron is very, very necessary in that regard. And they found lower responses in people who had more quote unquote normal ferritin levels. But the doses were really like widely varied. It was kind of like hard to elucidate what was maybe the best. I know that general recommendations for the general public is that women need 18 milligrams of iron a day, men need 8. Pregnancy increases iron needs, and then obviously it's like they say women over 51 can decrease their iron supplementation, and that all I think is like paired with menses effectively. So like that iron recommendation probably goes up earlier for girls that are menstruating earlier, stays around longer for women who are continuing to menstruate, who aren't like peri or postmenopausal yet. And so it feels like we're kind of still swinging in the dark a little bit. And it's a lot of experimentation when it comes to like how much iron you can digest well, that you can potentially absorb. More is not better. GI distress is a big issue for a lot of folks taking supplemental iron. And I'm kind of wondering how you guys feel about if people's diets are not meeting their iron needs, their ferritin's dropping, they need to orally supplement iron. What could maybe or should maybe be kind of next steps there? No wrong answers because we've
Well, I mean,
predicated this on not being doctors.
yeah, I was gonna say I'm not a doctor. My father, he worked in food science, human nutrition research, so actually like supplementation and stuff like that is actually like what he did a lot, but for omega-3 fatty acids and things like this, specifically supplementing with like fish oil and things like that. But that I think is, yeah, it's like a little bit closer to the actual like, fatty acid that you're ingesting, because it's usually like capsules or like actually like cod liver oil or something like this. But I think the general consensus is that, supplementation is a good idea if you're kind of like to supplement, like in addition to like, but I think real food sources is always like a good way to start, but it does take a long time. And so I mean, I like to think about it as like a helping hand, but not like the absolute solution, right? Like if you're not eating enough or like eating the real foods, like I don't think that you can just rely on supplementation alone to kind of get your needs for iron or anything else. But again, yeah, like if you're in a low spot, like that's sometimes like our only option.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you are testing low and you have talked with your doctor and you see the whole picture and it comes out that you should be supplementing, I don't think that's a bad thing to do, especially as an endurance athlete, or even as a normal person that's not an athlete, because like I think the stat we learned in class was like 30 to 35% of people who menstruate are anemic. And so more often than not, women are anemic, and it's probably like from a whole slew of issues. And so I don't think supplementing is a bad deal, especially knowing just like, you can't eat red meat every single day. That might lead to a different kind of problem. And so I think the amount of iron that's bioavailable in leafy greens and stuff is pretty low. And so you're not going to be able to get a ton of iron from those. And so I think supplementing is not a bad idea, especially like for again for athletes. And then one other note that people have found, I'll put the study in the show notes once I find it or dig it up. But for athletes going to altitude, it has been proven that iron supplementation is beneficial for keeping iron stores where they were and not letting those athletes drop down.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
there's lots of reasons to supplement, I think, especially because again, I don't know about you guys, but can you eat a burger every day? I can't.
I
I
mean,
mean,
and I
I
don't
could
think that,
try.
And
yeah,
that's
I
not
mean, yeah,
healthy.
exactly. That's not healthy or like necessarily like, yeah.
Hmm.
I think it's the same thing with supplementation, like too much. It's like who's filtering
Hmm.
it out, like in your body, who I think of like organs. But I mean, I think we outlined, it's a complicated. There's lots of like terminology and things that like even for like a complete blood panel or like something focused on iron. So it's like you said, Keely, it's really important to get the full picture. So it's like I've also seen people who are just throwing it out there, like, well, if X number percent of female athletes are anemic, well, then everyone should just be taking a supplement. I don't think that's the answer either,
Hmm.
but it's like that's mostly of just like get the
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
picture.
yeah. I think
It
you
can
don't
take
get to
a long time.
supplementation. You don't get to supplementation unless you've like done some blood work and are talking to a doctor. I think blindly
Oh yeah.
supplementing a non-water soluble mineral is like not a good look for anyone, as the kids might say. But I think that it's like plenty of people right have like genetic markers for hemochromatosis or high iron, right? And like I've known athletes who have like actually pulled like had their IUDs pulled because they like weren't menstruating anymore, and they're like actually they needed to bleed a little bit every month in order to keep their iron levels low enough because their iron was so high. So it's like it's really interesting like how the system tries to work it out for us but doesn't always quite get it. So it's like yes, if you have low iron, adding in a supplement and like looking at some dietary factors is probably a great idea, but again, get that blood test done, talk to your doctor. Um there's some, I would then source a safe for sport, NSF certified supplement, not just because it's like good for elite athletes, because quote unquote, what you're taking, but it's like supplements are not regulated. And you want to make sure that if you're spending money on a supplement, like what is in the supplement is what it says is in the supplement. And so I would like Thorne does test most of their products. That would be a good one to start with. Um, but yeah, I would look for like an NSF regulated supplement because it's been third party tested. So it should have in it what it says is in it. And that's kind of like an important next step. There's been some information saying that like combining iron supplementation with a symbiotic, so a pre and probiotic supplement, can aid in absorption, which might speak to some sort of gut level issue. H. pylori apparently actually like feeds on iron, and so not knowing you have high levels of H. pylori, a bacteria, could actually be the white whale you're looking for when it comes to your anemia. I've seen that in more than one athlete. I saw a bit of research on it the other day. So that's actually super interesting as well. So there's probably like supplementing is good if the blood values say you need it. And then trying to maybe like pick apart what it's coming from. It could just be running and menstruating and being a active female in this case, but it could also be something else underlying. So just kind of looking at that. And then again, to reiterate, if you're a professional athlete who is having to get drug tested or could get drug tested, it is very likely that you need a retroactive or a current TUE for an iron infusion because IVs are tightly regulated in the anti-doping space, and most infusions are given at a rate higher than what is allowed. Um, and so it's allowed in like emergency settings and in surgical settings, but generally for something like this, you would need a retroactive or a current TUE just to kind of dot your I's and cross your T's. They're not testing for something that's going to show like, oh, you got an iron infusion, but it's technically infusions, IVs are super tightly regulated. So this is a note for professional athletes out there that you need to do a little bit of legwork if this is what your doctor is recommending. I just want to touch on creatine real fast, like just like a little, because we kept getting questions about it, and then we'll wrap things up because we've had more than one question. And I don't really have a great answer for you. The answer is I think it depends. But people have asked about creatine supplementation, and so just to set the table for it, creatine is a compound that comes from three amino acids. It's found mostly in your body's muscles as well as in your brain. And most people get creatine through seafood and red meat, though at levels that are generally below what is found what is found in synthetically created creatine supplements. Um, the body's liver, pancreas, and kidneys also make about 1 gram of creatine per day. So it is something that you are synthesizing as well. But it is important in the sense that it's stored in your body as phosphocreatine in your muscles, and then it's used for energy. Think ATP here, literally, when it comes
Really
to
fast energy.
really fast. So you see this used a lot more in strength training, bodybuilding, high intensity sports, jumping sports, etc., where you need that increased energy, that high metabolism energy. So we don't necessarily see it as much in endurance sports, and the jury is really out when it comes to endurance sports, specifically for women. I read a number of different papers today trying to be like, okay, is there a specific thing? Why could this maybe be beneficial for women? I've heard anecdotal stories from people about why they like it. It could improve recovery times. But it also like has the side effect of water retention. And so a lot of people don't like it because you retain more water. So you physically gain weight from this water retention. And it just like it feels uncomfortable. It feels uncomfortable. They feel the impact of it being slower. Some studies said maybe it lowers your VO2 max. And I was like, well, if you think about VO2 max as like there's a weight factor in it, unless you're talking about absolute VO2 max. And so it's like technically, yeah, if you gained water weight, your VO2 max would be lower. But yeah, so it's like kind of very, very mixed. But what I found was interesting was an article looking specifically at like using it for female athletes kind of broadly and using it across like a female's lifespan. And so it seems like it could be beneficial for specific subpopulations. So not necessarily athletes, but a quote from the article, Creatine Supplementation in Women's Health, a Lifespan Perspective. They note due to hormone-related changes in creatine kinetics and phosphocreatine resynthesis, supplementation may be particularly important during menses, pregnancy, postpartum, during and postmenopause. Creatine supplementation among premenopausal females appears to be effective for improving strength and exercise performance, and in postmenopausal females may also experience benefits of skeletal muscle size when you're losing lean muscle mass and function when consuming high doses of creatine, 0.3 grams per kilogram per day, and favorable effects on bone combined with resistance training. So they talked a lot about like how it impacts cognitive function and how it could be really effective, particularly in like during and postmenopausal phases when it comes to like building and maintaining muscle mass, which makes a lot of sense, right? Like that's a critical element of aging for athletes, for women in general. Is that you're losing muscle mass really rapidly. So
Yeah.
doing something that would potentially aid that could be very beneficial from a health perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's why it has interest in the female endurance space and why people are studying it, because obviously if you can use it to help maintain some of your muscle mass, like in a population that inherently loses muscle mass through training, could help runners keep some of the muscle mass that they might be losing from, high volume endurance running, which could, help you with your running. But
Yeah,
yeah, jury's still out a little bit.
yeah, they evaluated thermoregulation and hydration status in a study because there was like some speculation that maybe it would like negatively impact that, which would be a big like detractor for endurance athletes, and they found no like supportive
Mm.
evidence of that. So that's great. And I feel like anecdotally, someone told me that they were like because they feel like they're dehydrated all the time, they actually felt that creatine helped them like almost stay hydrated. And I was like, I don't know if water retention works systemically in that way, but maybe it does.
Well, it would help with muscle damage for sure because it would
Yeah.
have extra water in your muscles so that they'd be able to repair better. So from a systemic level, probably not quite, but from a muscle level, yes,
Yeah. Which
which
is
is great.
interesting. Which is yeah, so like
Mhm.
there could be a recovery element. So you kind of
Yeah.
got to weigh the pros and cons. Everyone feels different like responses to it as well. So it could be something to experiment with. It takes time for it to kind of like dose into your system, it sounds like, is a big thing as well. So it's
Mhm.
one of those things where it's like you might not know right away. You might need to ride it out for a month, which seems like a lot of effort for me personally for something that we're not quite sure on. Like it's not like a given that you're going to enjoy the effects of it. But yeah, so that's the take that we've gotten. And we've gotten a couple people that have slid into our DMs when we've kind of had like ask us anything specifically about creatine. So just wanted to touch on that more than anything because we keep pushing it off the docket. And I keep getting targeted ads for creatine gummies, and I have no idea if there's any validity there. So I'm sorry, I can't help you. They look really tasty. Um, I'm trying not to fall for it, but I have been getting a lot of targeted ads. And I'm definitely, everyone actually listening to this now are also going to get targeted ads for creatine gummies. I apologize. Anything else anyone wants to add in that regard? Yeah. I would just
Mm.
say, like, try to make an educated decision. There is some good information out there, but the internet is a wild, wild place. That was a lot of information. So if questions, more questions about iron, for example, tell us we're wrong about creatine. Slide into our DMs and just tell us that we're wrong. Would love to hear it. I don't check the DMs personally, so it's not my issue. But dude, slide into our DMs. Let us know if we're wrong. Also, yeah, if you have more questions on iron specifically, we've got a lot of personal experience with that as well, and we're nerds, so keep them coming. We'll keep trying our best to do it. But we have gotten responses in the past where people just didn't realize that like iron deficiency was such a big deal. And we helped because they went and got a blood test and then they took iron or they saw a doctor and like life got better. So this is your reminder to maybe check in on yourself too. Okay, wrapping things up. Society Slam. And to kick things off on Society Slam, I'm calling dibs on the first one. Ha ha ha. And it's because it is a shout out about our partnership with Rabbit. Someone wrote in and said, love Trail Society, love Rabbit Apparel. Happy to see you together and can't wait to hear more. I love the multiple soft rabbit tees I have, but my absolute favorite layer is my long sleeve UPF deflector layer, which I have in white. I got this to crew and pace a friend at Javelina, and it was a great sun layer. But I have also used it all winter. I'm in the Front Range of Colorado, and my winter layering system. I would love to get a second one, and would love some pretty colors or patterns. Let's see what we can do. That's my vote for TS merch option. Keep up the great work.
Yeah,
Nice.
thanks to everybody for all of the fun suggestions about the merch. We will take all of your opinions into our decision-making process, but no
Keep them
promises.
coming.
Someone
Yeah.
was like, Big Dog's Gotta Eat is finally going to happen.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll take the next one. This one is a tricky one, and I don't think we're gonna have an answer, but it gives me an idea for a new topic slash someone we should get on the podcast to interview. So my question is that I've have avoided birth control ever since my husband has had his vasectomy because I like having my period as a gauge for energy availability and if I'm dipping into red S. I had an eating disorder as a teen, and having my period is a comfort to me athletically. I know I'm not overdoing it. Very fair. That's a great idea. But I'm so tired of the heavy periods of having endometriosis, and I need protection in this state. Do y'all recommend IUDs for female athletes? I think I remember you do. Can you link the episode? I'm going to let Corinne answer this because you might remember that episode better than I do. But I think in general, we've never really discussed this, especially for aging athletes. And so would love to get someone on the podcast who is really well versed in endometriosis. Actually, I think that's super fascinating, and PCOS and all sorts of ovarian kind of ovarian and uterus issues. So thank you for this message, but
Maybe
I don't
Lauren
really.
Puretz wants to come on
Oh yeah,
as a
maybe.
gynecologist. We'll
But
source a
yeah,
running gynecologist and we'll answer
That'd be
all
cool.
your gynecological questions.
do you
So
remember
then
that episode, Corinne or
I don't
Hillary?
remember which
Yeah.
episode that was
I
in, but I can
don't.
say as someone Endometriosis is really tricky. Sometimes you can use an IUD, sometimes you can't,
Right. Yeah.
based on like state of tissue growth, fibroids, etc. So that's really going to be individual. Generally speaking, though, and this is like mostly from having friends who have really horrible endometriosis who have and or haven't been able to use an IUD. Some have been able to. And they were able to use Mirena effectively, and it did help with their heavy periods, etc. But again, endometriosis is a tricky beast in which it does not always respond well to something being put in your uterus, unfortunately. So
Right.
that might not be the best option. That's why like I'm gonna say when we shit on oral birth control, because it's like systemic hormones, etc. There are a number of medical conditions that actually benefit a ton from oral birth control, including like PCOS. And I wonder if endometriosis is like potentially in that vein as well. So we're gonna find a running gynecologist and we're gonna answer all your gynecological questions.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think
and
we
maybe in
have
the
a
meantime, talk to your own OB if you have one or
Yeah.
PCP. Yeah.
Yeah, but talk to them about a good birth control route for you. One for safety, but two, like recognizing that you have a complicating uterine um issue that is going to be a little bit trickier to navigate.
we did have a few episodes where we did talk about birth control, and I think we have some on like perimenopause, but this is like earlier on. I don't know, maybe we can like figure that out and link it in the show notes or something
Yeah, but
for
we never talked about endometriosis, so I think
no, not endometriosis, but she
yeah.
referenced the aging athlete. So and we have talked about birth control, but
We'll throw the aging
um,
athlete into the show notes, but we will get back to you on endometriosis and
yeah,
how to navigate that.
yep.
Yeah.
Um,
Haley, you're
Yeah,
kicking off the
it's
book
funny. I
nerds.
think we both mentioned this last time, or maybe all three of us, is different, but the different books we were reading. But the message says, "Hey girlies, I love to talk about all the books and nerding and the nerding out. Please send me names of these books. Reading is the other favorite thing to do after running." And yeah, and they really like the last podcast, so thanks. Yeah, so for me, I was referencing a book last time, Sam Keen. He's one of my favorite like historical science writers. He's written several books like Disappearing Spoon. I'm a chemist, so like I love that. He's written Dueling Neuroscientists. The ones that Corinne and I were nerding out about was the Sam Keen book about the ice pick surgeon, referencing just like, I don't know, like thievery and illegal things that have actually helped to advance science. So that's a really interesting one. And then, yeah, I'm reading some Ryan Holiday and Stoicism. That's always really good.
I thought we were talking about Onyx Storm, to be honest. So I'm reading romantasy books about dragons.
Yeah, me
So
Oh
too.
yeah,
So I'm
so
gonna
am
put these
I.
in the show notes. We will demarcate them by genre,
Yeah.
and you
anything by
can take your pick.
Rebecca
Yeah. So it's
Yarros,
like
Sarah
We
J.
don't need you. Yeah,
Maas.
we'll put
I've
them all
read
in
exactly. I'm reading
here.
the other series of that too, because I have
It's the
my
best
Onyx
one. The Sarah J.
waiting
Maas
for.
series, the next series is way better than the first one.
Wait, which one is that, Keely?
Which one are you
I'm not
reading?
on Alcotar, so her other series, it's like
There's two other
Assassin.
series.
Oh, the
Oh,
Assassin one.
okay.
Oh
The
my gosh,
Assassin. Yeah.
thank goodness, because I don't know what
Very
I'm gonna do when
good.
I finish these two.
Oh no, no,
I'm
no,
like,
no. I read 18 books by her in
wait,
2024.
seriously? Okay,
Yeah.
so
Oh,
tell me what these are, because I'm reading
We'll put
Actor
them in
right
the show
now.
notes, but I'll text you them.
yeah. Oh
Please.
yeah. We got you covered. If you need some
Literally,
romantasy to keep things light, we got you covered.
but here's the thing. Here's what I want to add before we part ways is that you have to have a system of like when you're reading the fantasy and when you're reading like, because I love to learn from books too. So it's like I have like, okay, how do I want to like wind down the evening or how do I want to start my day? By like reading something scientific or whatever. So brain's really sharp in the morning. And then I read like to like wind down or go to bed at night. But that's a little bit
Brainwash.
hard because sometimes you want to keep reading.
Oh yeah, it's really bad. While I'm in school, like if I'm not on break, I have to limit myself to a number of pages. Otherwise, yeah, I don't get enough
I'd be
I'm
sleep
in
like
and it's
that
one
not
too.
healthy.
chapter. Yeah.
I'm in
Yeah.
that too. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
I
Okay,
like
let me
reading
give you
I don't read
this.
nonfiction anymore because I read too much nonfiction all
Exactly.
day.
This is the thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was nice to have a little break. Yeah.
I also started rereading Dave Eggers' The Circle, which is like maybe too real for right now. It's just like it's very dystopian and it's brilliant, but it's like it's a little too real, I think, for the current climate that we're living in. And so I'm really struggling. It's my bedtime. It's been my bedtime read, and my dreams are getting wacky. So I might have to push pause and find a new romantasy book. You've made it this far into the podcast. You're here for the romantasy talk. So, if you're here for the romantasy talk, please go leave us 5 stars wherever you're listening. A nice review saying pleasant things would be ideal, and share it with a friend because that truly does help. Eat a snack if you're 75 minutes into your run right now, and otherwise, we'll catch you next time out on the trails.